Waving from the control center. Okay, how cool is that? He's going to be back over there working as soon as we're done here. So
I'll try to sneak out.
Yeah, so if any of you are on the tour this afternoon, you may see somebody you know down in the control center. Some of you may have seen him. Oh, well, I mentioned that already. He is an ISS, an International Space Station, which you see in the new exhibit, I hope, downstairs on the International Space Station program. So Anthony is an ISS controller here at JSC. He's a certified SPARTAN, which stands for, everything here has an acronym if you haven't noticed that already in the NASA world. SPARTAN, or Station Power, Articulation, and Thermal Analysis. A FALCON, Power, Heating, Articulation, Lighting Control, and THOR, Thermal Operations and Resources. So he's got multiple hats that he wears when he's on console down in the control center with our orbiting asset that is up there 365 days a year, 24-hour a day oversight on the astronauts that live on orbit. So they never really, you guys don't stop. There's somebody
they bring us food on Christmas and New Year's.
Exactly. Holidays, what's that? Vacation, got to figure out how to cover your shifts and that sort of thing. So in addition, I just learned this morning that he had worked at the Kennedy Space Center as well, so I'm sure he'll share a little bit of that with you. And I found that his father-in-law is a shuttle astronaut, so this guy's got it going on. He's got it in his family. Spartan, Falcon, and Thor are names of the positions responsible for power generation, power distribution, and thermal control of the US Orbital Segment. So as you guys may have heard along the way, there's multiple components to the International Space Station, and so one of the US segments, it sounds like you've got your hands around. And, you know, if the lights go out, the cooling stops, that'd be a bad day up on the space station, particularly if you're on the dark side as you come around every 90 minutes orbiting the Earth. So it's important that these guys keep them up and running. So as things happen, they're troubleshooting it here on the ground, which can make for a pretty exciting day. So let's give an enthusiastic Conrad Foundation welcome to Anthony.
Okay. I think I'm mic'd. Can everyone hear me? Yeah. Okay, we'll just assume that that's a yes. And I will get appropriately informal by sitting down. So as she said, International Space Station Flight Controller. I guess about half of you came through the room yesterday, so we get the front row center seat, which is nice because I don't have to look at the back of anybody's head, and I can just kind of look out the window. But it's not really my window. It's a bunch of cameras on the outside of the space station. And I think it was Einstein who said there's no privileged reference frame. Well, space is probably pretty close. So I have what I consider to be a really cool job. It's probably a lot like being an air traffic controller as they describe, hours of boredom, moments of sheer terror, except my hours of boredom are still pretty good too. The hours of sheer terror, those come as well. So my background is, so I'm 29. I graduated from Embry-Riddle Aeronautical University in Florida. It's in Daytona Beach, which is, anybody from Florida? Yeah, Daytona Beach is not the nicest town in the world, but it's near Kennedy Space Center. And the thing I miss about working there is the launches. Just the idea that you work, you stop, you stand up, you walk outside, and a rocket goes to space. That's cool, and you still get paid for those times. I did that. I worked in the solid rocket booster world for about 2 years as a co-op, as an intern, because I was going to school nearby and I could commute and everything. And then I was working for a contractor, United Space Alliance, and I saw that internal job postings, when it was coming time for me to graduate, I knew that maybe I wanted to live I wanted to work in a NASA center, but I wanted to live near a city. And the only places you can do that really for NASA are NASA Glenn, which is in Cleveland. But as somebody from Pittsburgh, I am taught from birth to abhor all things Cleveland. So I did not go to Glenn. There's NASA Ames out in San Jose, where the cost of living is tremendous. And then there's here, where it's hot, but if you can get by that, then it's a pretty good place to live. But man, is it hot. And I'm glad we found the only fireplace in all of Houston to put right here next to me, because those are not something, It'd be like showing an iPhone to a caveman for most Houstonians. They don't know what that is. So I saw in the job postings that there was this very like badly worded job posting for technical, mission operations, something, something, etc. And it took me a few read-throughs of it to go, oh my goodness, they're talking about mission control. And sure enough, which still floors me, mission control is a job largely for what they would consider to be the young. It is, I'd say the average age of mission controller is probably 28, 29, something like that. There's a couple reasons for that. One is the off hours. That's probably the primary reason. Especially space station, we are running 24/7, 365. I will be on shift from 3 p.m. to midnight tonight. That's my favorite shift because I'm a night owl. But then some unlucky guy has to come in after me, do the midnight to 8 a.m. shift, which is the not fun shift. And it is, the youth and everything of the people we work around, it's like a college campus at JSC. It's probably, in the engineering world, one of the things that's a problem is sometimes there's not enough women involved. But JSC, I'd say, has a pretty good ratio of guys to girls. Met my wife there, so I'm doing okay. And it's just a good environment because we all think that, and we all have proven that we can take on the world and change things. And it's a really neat job that you can, as somebody straight out of college, you can send commands to a space station. So, today you guys are talking about energy and the environment. And so that's kind of what I do in a very small sense. It is, let's see, we got 8 solar arrays. They put out about 30 kilowatts each, so 240 kilowatts of power on space station. Now that's about 300 horsepower, which I think is about 3 Honda Civics. Somebody can check me on that who's a car guy. That's a fairly good bit of power if you're talking about a house, but if you're talking about a laboratory, that's got to house 6 people, that's not all that much power. And so what the job becomes is it's really an efficiency. I'm like an efficiency guy. I am in charge of doing, makes it sound funny, I'm in charge of doing as little as possible to make things work. And I think that's what a lot of engineering-y type things are. The times when for instance, we will, back in the shuttle days, it was a lot of switch throws. Like you'd call up to the crew and say, flip this switch, because the shuttle was designed back in the 70s, and there wasn't really the communications bandwidth available to where you could click a button on the ground and go send it, and a thing would move in space. Since the space station has been put together in the past 10 years, most of what we do is commanded from guys like me on the ground. We have a graphical interface. It looks like a space station. You click this module, you click this pump, you type in a new speed, and you click a button, and it goes through the things that get it up to the space station, which I am glad I don't need to know as much about, and a pump changes speed. Now that's really great because it allows the astronauts to stay efficient. If they're not flipping switches and replacing parts and turning on pumps and things like that, then that's time they can be used for the stuff that is important about putting humans in space, which is to do science. They can go over to a scientific rack, the fluid science experiment, pull out a cartridge of some fluid and put in a different cartridge. And so these, we view our success, especially now that space station's all built, in terms of how many hours a week we do science. And so between the 6 people on the US side, we can regularly shoot above 40 hours a week with science. Well, that's, you think, well, 40 hours a week is not that much, and there's 6 people. What are you guys doing the whole time? But those 40 hours, you are, it may take 15 minutes of those 40 hours for them to replace that cartridge, but then that experiment can run for hours and hours and hours. So it's a testament to how well the thing was designed. I mean, it is every couple of weeks it hits me, oh my goodness, the space station is still, it's still there. Like it hasn't fallen apart yet. Because especially in my job, we're trained to handle when it falls apart. And the fact that all these things still work, and it looks kind of like what it was designed to look like, pretty much, almost. Like some parts of it are different, but we're trying. But the fact that it looks like it was supposed to look is really something, especially since we planned this thing out 20 years ago. And that's where the money went, is in the ability to handle the changes and in the ability to kind of adapt on the fly to, it's built like a Tinker toy. You can put this part here, you can put this part there, and we can make it up as we go. And I'll talk more about that in a little bit. But the idea of waste in actions that we do, the idea of waste in things we do on Earth when it comes to the environment and energy. Waste is something that will kill you in space. You have very tight limitations on the stuff that you can get to space station and back. It's like planning for a camping trip, but you can't really live off the land. You have to bring everything with you. And once it's there, you kind of want to keep it there because once you put it back, there's no going back. Or it's very expensive to get it back. And so we think very carefully about, okay, what kind of stuff do we need to get up to the space station? What kind of spare parts do we need to have available? Because we think this pump is going to fail every so often. And so those decisions are made by people, and people can be wrong. But those decisions are made by people, and those parts are put on station. And sure enough, when the shuttle stopped flying a couple years ago, that was pretty much, you have this many parts, go. And from here on out, we can't replace the big things necessarily. We have spares, and we think those will get us through to 2020, maybe 2028 if we're lucky. And until then, this is so we lost a lot of guys in my position after shuttle ended, and so shuttle had similar guys like me on their side, guys and girls doing shuttle flight control. A lot of them quit right after shuttle because they're like, well, this isn't interesting anymore. We're just going to be flying around. But those people were in it for the wrong reasons, my opinion. Because now the real engineering fun takes place. Because for the next 10 years, we've got to figure out a way to hold this thing together with toothpicks and baling wire and whatever we can find. Things are going to break. And it is the waste in what we do needs to be eliminated. Not just in the fact that we have the spare parts on board. The station, do you ever see the awful show Hoarders? The station looks a little bit like that. We have stuff piled up everywhere because you don't want to get rid of stuff before you absolutely have to because it could come in handy. We have used parts during spacewalks that were taped together and some metal sheet, I don't even know where they got sheet metal up there, but they bent something and used it to help deploy a solar array. The astronauts were really excited about that. They had like tin snips out, and the astronaut called down and said, "I have beat this metal. I have built this." He was super excited. So we're all about that. But it is unforgiving if you waste. And it is not just in stuff. It is also in, for a guy like me, it's in action. On your smartest day, you are not going to be as good as you want to be. So when stuff fails on station, it's fairly random. Though another thing you learn about engineering is the things break when you poke them, okay? So that's why people like me try and not send commands to the vehicle while the crew is asleep. Because we want them at their best and brightest if something happens and we need them to do something. And chances are, if you're going to set off any alarms on the space station, it's going to be because you did something, because you changed the way a system works. That doesn't always happen. You've got solar particles flying out there, especially for a guy who works the electrical system. The electrical system will choose its time and place to fail whenever it likes. But we try not to perturb it. Don't knock on the glass and anger the animals, that sort of thing. But when that does happen, when the failures happen, and they do happen, the idea is to pre-script as much of our responses as possible. And so that's what a large portion of my job is. There are probably 20 people in my group who do my job. And that's because we run 3 shifts a day, 365. People don't want to work, that much. And so a lot of our job is spent in an office where we are planning and we are coming up with procedures and we're always thinking about a better way to do things. Google advertises the fact that its employees are given X amount of hours every week to do whatever they want to do. Well, we kind of are too. We are given the latitude to make things better as we see fit, because it is better for everyone if we can come up with a better solution for if this part fails or whatever. So when the yellow and red lights start coming up on the board that say, things are breaking, no matter how much you've trained, and we train a lot, we go through these simulations where all these failures happen simultaneously, and you will see those failures many times, but on the day of, when you know it's the real vehicle, and no matter what, you cannot just put it out of your mind and think this is a training exercise. No, you know that it's the real vehicle because you've got crew members on the video floating by. You're not going to be as good as you want to be. Your calls on what we call the flight loop, which is how we communicate with the flight director, the guy in charge of the room, the guy or girl in charge of the room, will never be as crisp as you want them to be. And what we are taught is how to not waste our words, not to say more than we have to. This fireside chat is weird for me because I am just sitting here talking. And that is something we are taught not to do, because you want to get your information out as succinctly as possible in the shortest format and most information-dense way you can, so that the person in charge, the flight director, can get on to the next thing. And so when the failures happen, you want to have a piece of paper that you can go by. And so that's why folks like me sit in the office and say, well, if this were to happen and you have this, then do these things. And that's great. And it has saved our butts many times. But it's not always, the failure on the day of is always going to be just a little bit different. And you're going to find out by doing what you got wrong. And, I've heard that recently they've started trying this with doctors, surgeons, giving them checklists for the day of the surgery to make sure that they, have all their tools in place and make sure that they, for lack of a better term, make sure they pull out all the stuff that they put in when it comes to like surgical equipment, because that happens sometimes. And there's been a lot of resistance by doctors because they see that as infringing and people telling them that they don't know what they're doing. On your best day, you're not going to do everything right. And if there's a list somewhere that can make it just a little bit easier, if somebody went through this before or thought through this in an office when it was quiet and people weren't yelling at them, then that's probably a pretty good place to start. So one of the things to learn is don't waste the time that you have. Don't waste time thinking of things as they're happening. Do as much pre-planning as possible. And in every aspect. We have a position that is one of my back rooms. People you don't see in the fancy front room. They get to sit in the back room and not have to wear a tie. And they're called the Power Resource Officer. They're in charge of apportioning those 320 kilowatts or whatever, 240, whatever, and apportioning them to all of the loads that we would have on, all the payloads, all the science stuff that needs to run. And so they think about all this beforehand, and they come up with the most efficient way to configure the solar arrays and move the power around so that everybody can have as much as what they want to do as much science as they want. It would be nice if the planet Earth had one of those people, an efficiency expert, because there are places where we have a glut of energy. Iceland is sitting on top of a geothermal one of the most geothermically active places in the world, and just one of the most beautiful places in the world. As part of my desire, I hate heat. I hate Houston's heat, and so I went to Iceland last August, and that was a good idea. I should do that more often, though it is very expensive, and people are a little bit weird. But they have energy there is cheap. You don't have people don't have hot water heaters in Reykjavik, which is the capital of Iceland, because they know that all their water comes from geothermal activity. So they heat up some water in the ground, comes up, spins a turbine, and then they pipe the electricity and the hot water directly to town. Hot water is free because it's just part of what they do. So you've got places that have a ton of energy and places that don't. Places that are starving for energy, starving for clean water. And if we can do a better job of moving those things around and getting, setting up the paths to get where we have lots of stuff to where we don't, that's the engineering challenge of the 21st century. Some of the stuff we do on station to keep the crew alive is really remarkable, and it can easily be adapted to stuff we do on Earth. The crew, it used to be that we would fly water up. The crew would drink water, and then they would output the water, and then you got rid of it. You'd vent it overboard or whatever. Now we have a regenerative life support system, which is great because the water goes in, and some stuff happens to it, and then it comes out as probably the purest, cleanest water that you can have. It's probably just H2O. And as long as you don't think about where it came from, it doesn't taste too bad. They have a ground test system at Marshall Space Flight Center in Alabama. So I've drank the water from there, and it's a weird, and it tastes fine, but you just keep thinking about it. And they served it to us warm, which I didn't think was necessary. But there is a part in there that doesn't take any power. It's called a microbial check valve. And what it does is it prevents bacteria from sneaking back into, so you have the bacteria that's from the contaminated water that comes from sweat and from all the different, wastewater that we have throughout the system. Bacteria grows in there, and we have a little valve, and don't ask me how it works, that's a question for my wife, that prevents bacteria from going the wrong way and getting into our clean supply that has been centrifuged and treated and is safe to drink. Now, that same piece of equipment has been used in earthquake relief, disaster relief in Haiti, in South America and Africa, to take water that isn't clean and make it clean as part of a system. And it's amazing because, gosh, there are 800 million people on Earth that don't have access to clean water. Just that little piece, the microbial check valve, could make a huge difference for all those people. Taking stuff from where it is a lot and taking it and moving it to where it isn't. That's the game. But the other part of the whole waste equation is the human side of it. So spaceflight is hard, and spaceflight is barely possible. It's just, there are so many things that can go wrong that if you looked at a list of them, you would say, we should probably not be doing this. But we do because the payoff is huge. It is what I think Carl Sagan or Neil deGrasse Tyson said, that the dinosaurs died because they had a vastly underfunded space program. And that's true. And just, when the asteroid over Russia just a couple months ago, I think one of them, again, I forget who, their quote is, asteroids are the universe's way of poking you and going, hey, that's that space program coming along. If humanity wants to survive another 1,000 years, you've got to get off the planet. You've got to have a backup Earth. You've got to start living off the land other places. And so that's why we do what we do. We know that if we screw up right now, if something happens on the space station, the way that funding works and economies are, there's a decent chance that we screw up tonight, 7 p.m., and human spaceflight might be done for a generation. And so That's fun to think about when you're sitting at work. But it also is a testament to how important it is, and how amazing it is of what humans can do. So an individual human, you guys are all individually smarter than you think you are. But at the same time, groups of humans have a tendency to be less smart than they think they are. There is a plaque in the mission management team room where we decide the future of shuttle missions and space station missions, where the big heavy hitters sit in and make the decisions that affect how the mission goes. There's a plaque sitting in the room that says, "None of us is as dumb as all of us." People in groups tend to get lost in a thought, and people have their reservations, but they look around and say, well, everybody else seems to like it, so sure, I guess there's something I'm missing about it. And one of the things you learn in my position is that there is no such thing as a dumb question, and you never need to feel bad about asking a question that you think is the most basic thing in the world, because there's chances are that somebody else was thinking the same thing. Bad decisions are made because people just acquiesce and assume that things are going to be fine, and that's how we wind up with Columbia and Challenger. Keeping that in mind, and keeping in mind the fact that we're just humans trying to do this, is really awe-inspiring. Because human space, I mean, you could say robotic space flight and human space flight, you could divide it all, but it's all human space flight. It's just what we call human space flight is more interesting to watch, because there's something about being able to see a human there and imagine, like, when you look at the robots on Mars, that's super cool. But there's something lost in the fact that you don't have a context of what it's going to be like to be there. You don't see a guy struggling along in a suit. You see just a very stale camera view. Whereas with manned spaceflight, there's that connection. You can see that a human is there, that a human who is fallible, and gosh, many of our astronauts are extremely fallible, that can make bad decisions and is sweating and is maybe looking a little fat these days, but they're there, and they're having the human experience of spaceflight, and that's really something. And the amazing thing to me is the decisions that go into keeping that running are just made by people. Like, there's not, you will find in about, you're all like, what, 13 to 18, something like that? You'll find in about 10 years, and as I have found recently, you will start, and it won't happen all at once, but suddenly people are going to start doing things that you say. And you're going to be the one calling the shots, especially this group. Hearing about your projects, and you guys are going to be calling the shots even sooner than you think. And it won't happen, like, there won't be a day when you're like, I'm in charge, because you have to come up to speed on everything. But it is, in our procedures on Space Station, there is a block. So the procedures are kind of in like a checklist format, or not a checklist format, like what do I call it when you have like blocks and an arrow block? Flowchart. They're in a flowchart format. And so, like I said, we plan out this stuff as much as possible before we fly. But there's always a chance that two failures happen at once, or it fails in a way we weren't expecting. And you wind up in a block that just says, check MCCH, which means check Mission Control Houston. So the crew has these procedures as well. So if they were running it on orbit, they would say, okay, well, we don't do anything, we'll let the ground handle it. There's nothing more demoralizing than being the ground and then hitting that block. It's like, oh crap, that's me. And that's what it comes down to, is that's why we train. That's why we learn. That's why it takes 2 years, give or take, to certify into doing the kinds of thing that I get to do. Because you have to learn how to think, you have to learn how to make decisions in a certain way, and you have to learn to talk a certain way, like I said, being very concise. And because on the day of, the failure that happens is not going to be the exact one you wanted. It's going to be something weird, and you will find that you will sit there and you'll think, oh dear, I am just like 2 years out of college. Why am I being asked to do this? This is something, so I need an adult. Like, and you run into that a couple times. You run into that. We planned a couple of EVAs that I had the good fortune of being involved in the past 6-7 months. Some things broke in my system, which, by the way, is a good way to get notoriety in NASA. Is if things break, you get actually like awards for that, which is a really weird system if you think about it. Oh wow, you did great because your system all broke apart. Well, that's it. You have to fix it, but you get awards for that, and that's pretty cool. So when things break and you have to go and plan a spacewalk, and you're just sitting in a room, and it's something that we didn't expect to break, and you're just throwing out ideas, and 3 days later, a crew is outside of the space station with wrenches, and they are doing what you thought of in a meeting one morning. And you can be wrong. Most of the time, you're going to be wrong, I bet, in your first thoughts and in exactly how they're supposed to play out. But that's what the people around you are there to do, to help you with that. But there are times when you just are the one making the decision. And knowledgeable, learn from the things you get wrong, and you won't get them wrong the next time. And be comfortable with the fact that people are going to be looking to you for guidance, especially this group. You're going to be in charge. And do things in the way you want to do them, the way you think is best. It'll probably work out okay. It won't work out exactly like you want it to, but it'll work out pretty okay. And just keep trying to do better. And knowledgeable that you're not going to get it right probably the first time. And things will have unintended consequences. You could think in a way that you could probably blame James Watt, who invented, who improved the steam engine. You could probably make an argument for blaming him for a lot of our ecological and environmental problems right now. But he's a human, and he had no way of knowing what was going to happen after he threw that all together. And so doing better the next time is what it's all about. And that's how we train and we learn from our mistakes. And that's why the space station, though I am amazed that it is still together and it looks kind of like what it was supposed to look like, that's really why it is. It's because people, individual people, younger than you think they are, make individual decisions that just are based on facts, based on science, and they work out okay. So with that, does anybody have any questions? There you go.
You talk about learning to communicate extremely efficiently. I'm actually a technical editor working with engineers.
Oh, bless your heart.
Trying to teach engineers how to talk about something succinctly, but also get a point across. So I'm wondering. I'm wondering how, if you can give us an example of something that could kind of illustrate your point for us.
Sure. So when we were launching shuttles, you have 8.5 minutes between the boosters lighting and being on orbit, and those 8.5 minutes are the most violent phase of flight and amongst the most problematic when it comes to if something goes wrong. There are certain smart things that people came up with to do, but you don't have an endless list of options. And so what we would find in simulations, and we sim and sim and sim over and over again, the room looks just like the Mission Control Center, it's just a little dingier. And you'd make a call on the flight director loop. And you'd get, at the end of the sim, not an accusatory manner at all, but there's always a debrief. How did that go? How could have that been better? And we have managed to foster an environment where people are totally comfortable saying, I screwed that up. Like, I was talking for way longer than I should have. If you make a 30-second call during ascent, you've taken up a fair percentage of the ascent in talking. That is the thing to avoid. And so We have our little verbal shorthand of saying, copy or, concur, go for this, using written communication rather than clogging up the voice loops. Sometimes we do that. It's kind of like instant messenger. And you will always be better at getting your point across if you just stick to the main points. Think about, what do I want the people to come out of this discussion with? What is the impression I need to leave with the flight director? What is the trade I am asking him to make, and what is my recommendation? Just getting it down to bare bones and not necessarily explaining everything around that decision, but being able to explain the very key points that, and have the context, the nuance in your back pocket, ready to come out when the flight director or somebody asks the next question. So it's all about being succinct, which I just wasn't in that answer, and then having reserved in your mind the next thing that might be asked.
Thank you.
What else? Nope, right here.
So when you, you're talking about talking very, clearly and distinctly, but what if there's not a lot going on at 2 in the morning? Can you just be like, hey, how's Earth looking? Like just chat normally with them, or is that something that's doesn't happen?
So when it comes to the crew members, we don't. They will sometimes call down to chit chat. It is rare, though it is pretty cool when it does happen. It's mostly those of us in the room, stuck in the room at 2 a.m. We will wind up chit chatting over the airwaves about this and that. We have displays, which you guys, if you haven't seen it yesterday, you'll see tonight in an hour. We have displays that will automatically trigger a beep in your ear if something goes out of limits, if something is doing something it wasn't doing before. And so we're in charge of making those limits, and it will alert you when you need to stop chatting and need to get to work. But the crew has a lot of nice things. First of all, they run. They wake up about midnight local Houston time. They go to bed around 4 p.m. local Houston time. So right when you guys are showing up at the control center this afternoon, or right when you showed up yesterday afternoon, they were going to bed. They might have been going to bed a little bit early yesterday because they had a news conference with Vladimir Putin of the head of Russia, if you've heard of that country. They had a news conference, and because of the way the timing works out, they had it in the middle of their crew sleep period. But when you are the leader of a major foreign power, you get to wake people up for that. But we give them the ability to talk to their families on the ground via it's like VoIP, voice over IP. It's like a Google Talk type of thing. So they stay in touch with the ground that way. They have email. They have the ability to surf the internet. And they, what they do with a lot of their leisure time is, we were smart and we set up the best view of on station, the cupola. We put that in the room that also has all their workout equipment. So that works out really nice because they work out 3 hours a day. And we have gotten really good at the whole workout thing. The most recent crew that just came back, this is a statement about how humans learn and learn to do things better the next time. If you would see a space station crew member come back from the early days of station about 10 years ago, for the first 3 weeks, they weren't doing so good. And then we kind of figured out what works, what doesn't. One of the things they teach the crew members, I don't know if Scott Perzinski told you this, is for the first 3 weeks after you get back down on the ground, if you are married to an astronaut, do not hand your spouse a glass of water, because they will have a tendency to do this when they are done drinking it. Because usually things they have learned just kind of float away. Well, that doesn't happen so much on the ground. But we've gotten to the point, by learning what works and what doesn't, that the last crew that came down, Sonny Williams and Aki Hoshide, 40 hours after they were on the space station, they walked into mission control room and said hi. They didn't look so hot, but neither would I after I flew back from Baikonur via probably three transfers on an airplane. Heck, I can't get back from Atlanta without looking pretty bad. And they just walked in. They looked pretty good. And so they are learning to adapt, and we're getting better at giving them the ability to do so. But it is nice that the place where they learn to adapt, the gym on station, has a great window, has a great view.
What advice do you have to give for a young engineer?
Well, it depends on what you want to do. No, it doesn't. No, it doesn't. It is, yeah. My first answer was completely wrong. Do what you're doing right now. Stay interested. My job, a weird and very certain specific type of people can do my job. I call it the assertive nerd. It is a weird, like, you got to be a super nerd and really like, getting into the technical stuff, and then being able to stand up at a meeting to the NASA equivalent of guys in suits and go, no, we're doing it this way because this is the right way to do it. Stay interested. Make decisions based on what you like to do, and take advantage of every opportunity. Understand that a lot of the opportunities you're exposed to are going to be by luck, but what you do with it is completely up to you. Learn to communicate. Well, you guys have all, this is perfect. Like, what you're doing right now looks great on a resume. And communicating on a technical topic, you will find that you come in heads and shoulders above other engineers if you have the ability to really communicate well. So keep doing what you're doing. And stay interested and find what you like. And if you don't exactly get to exactly where you want to be, you'll make decisions towards that goal, and it'll probably get you pretty close.
Sometimes when everybody's had these moments where you multitask and things go wrong and it gets insanely stressful and you just want to quit. I'm assuming that's happened at times with you, and I'm assuming it's also like a million times more stressful because there's people's lives in your hands. So how do you deal with that?
There are there are days when we were doing a simulation once, and I remember sitting there. I was in the back room, and I remember thinking, I just want to go home. Like, I just want to leave. I want to go home and let it be done. And you just have to recognize this is where it is nice, where you have a team working with you, and you fall back on your training. And how you deal with that is you understand that the first thing they'll tell you after a big failure happens, after you see, for those of you who take the tour today, you'll see kind of just to the right of the center screen in the mission control room. There's a screen that's usually white. That's good. If it's red and yellow, that's bad. And it will suddenly populate with red and yellow when things go wrong. And the first thing to do that we're trained is not to start checking things and all this. It's, you breathe, and that really buys you a lot. 5 seconds of just, okay, all right, let's do this. Rather than trying to just run into it and try and remember fits and starts of things that you've heard before is always good. There is always 5 seconds to breathe, take advantage of that, and then just, when it comes down to it, think through it logically. Just take a third-person view of it. What would I do to fix this kind of situation? Look at it in a general term. Don't think of it as, I have lost 3 of my core power channels on the space station. I need to reroute power from these other places. So think, all right, lights are out. Crew's probably got 2 hours till things start overheating. Where should I start? And break it down into smaller problems and take advantage of the little victories on the way and make a little checklist and check stuff off. That gets me by. You'll find what works for you. Who else? There you go.
What's your big problem that you have faced?
Okay, let's see. So my biggie is kind of an ongoing thing. Well, there's two. Let's go. The one that I actually had to, there are certain problems that are, bam, everything's broke, fix it, fix it, fix it. And I had that problem back in 2009 when the main bus switching unit number 1 failed. It just did a little thing. It, as my coworker likes to say, sometimes the power system likes to shut off just for funsies. And so it, some particle from the sun, some cosmic ray hits just the right spot in the code, and it goes off. All the switches open up, and it turns back on and says, "I'm fine. What the heck's going on?" So when you do that, you basically have to rebuild 1/4 of the station's power. And so when that happens, you get a whole bunch of messages. When that happened, I was actually on call. I wasn't in the room. So you get a call, a beeper goes off at 2 a.m., and I remember thinking, why do we have a beeper? Because cell phone, everyone has a cell phone. Drug dealers have beepers. But man, I'm glad we did, because that thing, I would not have woken up for the cell phone, but that beeper was louder than 1,000 suns. And so you get in there, and like I said, you just sit down and you go, okay, where are we? What do we need to do? How do I get cooling back? How do I stop the clocks on these things? The big one that I'm dealing with right now is a different kind of failure. It's the lingering failure. Starting in mid-2012, well, let me take it back. Starting in mid-2006, one of our coolant systems started leaking, about 1.5 pounds per year. So you can't send a crew out to go find where the ammonia, that's the coolant we use, is coming out of. So we just figured, okay, we'll refill it. And so we did that on STS-134. I got to design a method for the crew to go out and refill it with, of course, me designing. I got to execute it. A cast of thousands helped design it. And then last year, that leak started picking up quite a bit, quadrupled. And so the most recent EVA that the crew members have done, Sunny and Aki, performed an EVA in late last year where they rerouted coolant from where we thought it was leaking. It was going out to this radiator. This radiator sticks out into space about 40 feet. We're thinking, well, that's probably the leaker because it's hanging out in space 40 feet and stuff smacks into the station all the time. Micrometeoroids and stuff like that. So we rerouted away from that radiator, hoping that was the leaker. Hey, guess what? It's not the leaker. So now we have bought ourselves some time. We refilled it, and we're probably going to have to do something about it in the next few years. But by dumb blind luck, I've managed to become in charge of that whole situation. It's kind of cool. And it's a long-term failure. It's not like these BAM type failures. So it's kind of two different flavors. It's interesting, on the subject of stuff smacking in the station. Ainsley was the girl who took you, those of you who took the tour yesterday. She's a TOPO, Trajectory Operations Officer. They are in charge of making sure the station doesn't smack into anything. That is a very important job. Because if something is big enough, it'll just go right through the station. And we see that on radar, and we try and move around it. But we get hit with little things. One of the crew members, Mike Fossum, who flew up on increment 29, which I was proud to be a part of on the ground, comes back, and we're standing in a bar, and he's telling us about one night he was in the PMM, the pressurized something module. We'll say multi-purpose. That sounds like a NASA word. Pressurized multi-purpose module. And it's quiet. Everybody else is asleep. You just hear some coolant fans going. And then he just hears, ping! And so he says he stops. All right, it's fine. You can keep going. Something smacked into the station, something very small, probably the size of a grain of sand. And we have armor on the outside of the station. It's supposed to be able to survive a certain size hit. But, there are certain things that are too small to even detect. So we get hit up there all the time, and that's the non-standard nature of what we do. And that's another thing that's remarkable at the space station. It can survive stuff like that. People thought about that beforehand. And so that's another thing you don't want to have to make up on the fly.
All right, well, thank you so much, Anthony. Can we get a nice warm Thank you so much.
Absolutely.
For those of you going on the tour, get ready and make sure you're outside by 3 o'clock. And if you have any questions, I think Anthony will stay for a little bit.
Sure, and actually, for
Wanna
those of
say
you going
hello?
on the tour, I'll probably see you there too.